Today is February 8th, 2014, and this is episode 82. Welcome to Let's Talk Bitcoin, a twice-weekly show about the ideas, people, and projects building the digital economy and the future of money. Visit our website at letstalkbitcoin.com for all our past episodes, frequent, original, and varied perspectives, and of course, our Bitcoin addresses, where donations are appreciated. My name is Adam B. Levine. I'm the editor-in-chief of the LTB Network, and today we're looking for opportunity. Hayden Gill is a columnist with a fairly unique point of view. A Westerner familiar with the subtleties of Eastern culture, Hayden recently submitted a piece called The China Syndrome. I found it to be a thought-provoking minority report, another way to push forward. Then, Malcolm Cassell is no stranger to China himself. At the recent North American Bitcoin conference, Malcolm shared his view of what's happened in China over the recent months and what's likely to happen moving forward. We wrap today's show with Scott Robinson, a lead at the Plug and Play Tech Center, Incubator, and more. I caught up with him as they search for their final projects to invest in for this, their first round of Bitcoin startup incubation. But first, LTB correspondent and Bitcoin NYC organizer Jonathan Mohan sat down with Paul Vernon, the man behind Cryptsy. They talk origins and destinations, priorities, and future development. Enjoy the show.
So I'm sitting down with Paul Vernon, who is the founder and CEO of a site I think you're all familiar with, Cryptsy. So Paul, can you tell us what it was like starting it? Like, how did you get involved with cryptocurrencies?
Well, I got involved in 2011 initially. I had heard about Bitcoin and I created a miner, or I set up a miner and started mining it using a graphics card, which is something that you could do back then. I probably mined it for a couple months, and really the return on investment wasn't very high at that point. They were like $2, and the amount of electricity I was using was much more than that. So I got kind of bored with it after a while, and there was really nothing I could do with Bitcoin at that time. So I just kind of shelved it. Unfortunately, I did not delete my wallet, so I kept those.
There's no story of 7,000 of them existing in a...
Yeah, I didn't throw them out. I just turned off the client, and that was that. So, and when 2013 came along, and all of a sudden I have people telling me, "Hey, have you heard about Bitcoin? It's up over $100." I was like, "Oh, Bitcoin! I remember that. I think I have some of those." So I got kind of back into it. It kind of drugged me back into it. I went home, turned on the Bitcoin client, waited for it to download 2 years worth of chain that had been waiting for me to download, and noticed I had some Bitcoin in there. And at the time, I said, "Okay, I'm gonna go sell them at Mt. Gox, because that's where you go sell your Bitcoin." And they had a whole verification process that took weeks, right? And during this time, I started trading the Bitcoin on their exchange because I couldn't cash out. So that got me interested in that. I thought about mining again, but what I realized was that the difficulty was much too high for me to set up some graphics cards and mine again, at least for Bitcoin. But what I heard about was this thing called Litecoin that everybody was talking about, and that you could mine with your GPU. And since I already had GPU cards, it was easy. So I set up a pool. People started using my pool, and before you know it, there were additional alternate cryptocurrencies coming out. Ella Coin, Feathercoin, they weren't coming out as often as they are now, but they were coming out probably once a week. And every time one would come out, people who were participating in my pools, they said, "Hey, can you create a pool for this?" Or, "Hey, can you create a pool for that?" And I said, "Sure, why not? I'll create a pool for that." And people would mine that. And before you know it, I had about 20 different pools set up. And the problem was that people had nowhere to. They mined these coins, but there was nothing that they could do with them.
Right.
They couldn't liquidate them. They couldn't use them to spend money somewhere or anything like that. And half the time these guys were trading these coins through Google Docs on the Bitcoin forum, and I just thought that was a horrible idea, to trade with people on a forum that you have no idea really who they are and hope that they give you back what the agreed price is. So I said, "Okay, I have all these users of my pools. Let me create kind of an interface for them to use to trade the cryptocurrencies that they've generated on our pools." So initially, the coins that were listed on Cryptsy were from the pools that I had. And so I whipped that up fairly quickly. I think I got the beta version out within 3 weeks of Cryptsy, and it just kind of took people they liked it, and they used it, and before you know it, there's many more people that ever came to my pools were using Cryptsy, and people started asking for new coins and coins that I didn't have a pool for, and so I started investigating those and said, okay, yeah, we can add that, and it just kind of went from there. That the rest is history.
Yeah, I actually have a friend who, when he learned about Bitcoin, his onboarding process was that's all he did for a month and a half was Bitcoin, Bitcoin, Bitcoin. And then I told him about Cryptsy, and I showed him that there were like 100 other altcoins out there. He's like, I can't handle this. It would just consume me.
Right. I mean, we do have users that probably spend much more time on our site than is healthy.
Right. I like to tell people, hey, that thing that goes up and down 20% per day that we call Bitcoin? That's the blue chip stock. I would like to introduce you to this site called Cryptsy, where you can look at where the real volatility is at.
Right. Not necessarily volume, but definitely volatility.
Oh, that's for sure.
Yeah.
What do you think is the place for altcoins in the ecosystem? Do you always think that Bitcoin's going to be the dog and the altcoins the tail, or what's
altcoin's the place to mine, really. I mean, if you're a new miner and you don't want to buy an ASIC chip, an ASIC miner, invest huge quantities of cash into getting into mining, altcoins are that place to go to kind of get into cryptocurrencies without having to spend a lot of money. So, a coin comes out, the difficulty's low. You can mine with probably the GPU that's on your laptop and acquire a few coins that way, and just kind of get into the ecosystem. Right. And then, if Cryptsy is accepting that coin, then you can get into the other coins. You can trade them for Bitcoin, and now all of a sudden you have Bitcoins, and you didn't have to spend any cash for them.
Right. And that sort of brings another element into it, was when you get an altcoin and you learn about it and you bring it onto the exchange, what is that process? How do you determine, like, this is an altcoin that is ready to be on Cryptsy, this is an altcoin that's not quite there yet, or this is an altcoin to which I really don't think was made with intent that was pure.
Right.
Like, how do you make those distinctions? How do you look into that?
So I have a couple guys that help me out. One guy does less of the non-technical stuff. He'll review the coin and the people involved. And another guy is more familiar with the code. So he'll look at the code and make sure that there's no hidden gems or bugs, or some code versions are kind of known, especially with proof of staking, that there are bugs in it. If you forked off a certain version of Nova Coin or whatever, then there's a known bug, and so if you didn't know about it when you created your coin, then you're going to have problems later. So we look at who created the coin. Are they active? Are they going to continue being active developing this coin? Was there a huge pre-mine? I prefer no pre-mine, but if there was a pre-mine, what's the purpose of that pre-mine? How is that regulated? Are we just hoping that they do what they say they're going to do with this pre-mine, or are they actually doing what the intent is? What's the algorithm? How many users are asking for this coin? Is it something that we can integrate easily?
Right.
Because there are some coins that have come out that the integration just isn't as easy as some other coins, right? So we may have a handful of coins we're looking at, and these coins are easy to integrate. This coin is not that easy to integrate. So the one that's not easy to integrate is the one that kind of gets put on the back burner, and not necessarily that we won't integrate it. It's just that we have to work around the technology to get it integrated.
Right. I just think that you're in a tremendous position to help the economy in setting standards and guidelines for what it looks like, what a healthy altcoin looks like, what that sort of space should be. And as we're sort of growing into what this cryptocurrency space is going to become, we really need to understand best practices and guidelines. So I mean, I just like hearing what you're saying. I wish that there was a more, let's like a self-regulatory body. Like if you and BTCE and a couple others were to come together and say, hey guys, these are the guidelines to which we're not forcing upon the economy, but we really think that this would bring about the most positive effect for the altcoin economy. Is just something I would be very excited to get behind, because I really think that communal coming together and best practice setting is really what we need to grow as a community.
Yeah, we really don't disclose internally our discussions for inclusion, because we don't want people to create coins specifically to meet our specifications
Right.
and then say, okay, why aren't you adding my coin?
Right.
I met all your requirements. Everything's case by case. Every coin is case by case, and it's really about the community. The whole Cryptsy is about the community. If the community is behind a coin and it seems like a fair coin, then it'll probably get added. If it's some coin that somebody's just trying to push and it doesn't really have a lot of community backing, then it probably won't be a coin we add.
So I don't think I'll be trading my Coinye paper wallets over the Cryptsy.
Coinye, it had a lot of PR. And it had a lot of people who wanted to do it, right? We had a lot of users requesting Kanye coin,
yeah.
But the problem is that I am not ready to get into a legal battle with trademarks.
Most certainly.
So we did not add that. Fortunately, not, because he's true to his word as far as protecting his trademarks, right? So that's not something we want to get involved in.
Right. So what do you think of the idea of brand or company-based altcoins? Like, how excited are you for that? Where do you think the innovation in altcoins is going to be?
I think that's a good idea. I mean, if there's I like purpose. I like coins with purpose. Something that's just not a clone of another coin. It's because that gets boring after a while. Why do I want to use this coin if it's just a clone of this other coin?
Well, you mean I can't just change the supply parameter and make a totally new coin?
Sure you can, and if enough people start using it, then if it's popular enough, then yeah, you can.
I think I'm starting 0.1 coin, and there's only going to be 0.1 coin in circulation. See how far it goes.
Right, one Satoshi coin for every block or something like that. But I think branded coins, especially if there is a product or service attached with that. So we have this coin, and we have this service, and you can use this coin with this service. I think that's a great idea. Right. I don't have an example off the top of my head, but it could be anybody. I mean, any store or any major online outlet could create a coin, and that could be a method of commerce for them.
And what do you think in the altcoin space is something to keep your eye on, or something that you would like to see have developed the next year?
Wallets that are able to have multiple coins, because
multi-coin wallet.
Multi-coin wallet would be nice, and not necessarily for mining.
Right.
Just so you don't have 50 different wallets running on your computer.
Blockchain.info is the room down there. We should go and yell at them, say, hey, why don't you integrate with Cryptsy and take more altcoins?
Yeah. I mean, we kind of have that wallet type of service, right, where you can generate an address and hold funds at Cryptsy, but that's not our core. That's not our purpose.
So I have a number of Florin coin on Cryptsy, and I have a buddy who's one of the core developers, and I said, hey, how do I cold storage this? Is there any easy way to do this? And he was like, well, you do this, and that. And I was like, oh, I'll just keep it on Cryptsy. It kind of is funny that you're turning into the de facto blockchain.info for all the other things that aren't Bitcoin.
It's probably, holding them at Cryptsy is probably far more safer than holding them anywhere else, especially on your local computer.
Right.
Because so many things can happen to your laptop. You can spill coffee on your laptop and fry your hard drive, and that's it, right? Unless you can figure out a way to pull the data out of there, or somebody steals your laptop, you're screwed.
And I was pretty happy when you talked about the trade key, where now you just have your Cryptsy key, and that provides anyone who has an altcoin that's on Cryptsy to just send you the coin.
Right.
Because I actually had the great fortune of having a friend who wanted to pay me back the $50 he owed me in Nextcoin. Right when Next just started. And he's like, hey, that $50 is worth like $500 now. And I'm like, dang it. I wish I just didn't have the time to go install the client, download the blockchain, do all those sorts of things.
Yeah, Nextcoin is something that we're looking at, but it's one of those coins that is not a cookie cutter coin. So the technical implementation is something that's going to take a little more time. But it's popular. Users want it. It's fair. I mean, it has pre-mine, of course, because of how the whole thing works.
Right.
But it has a purpose, right? So I feel comfortable with that coin.
I've heard the word purpose a number of times.
Right.
So I'm kind of a coin with a purpose. So when you say purpose, what do you mean? Like what's an example of a coin with a strong purpose, so that we could sort of understand what you mean when you say purpose?
So like pre-mine with a purpose. People pre-mine, and then people pre-mine with a purpose. I'll go create a coin, and I pre-mine 20% of it, and I say I'm going to use it for generic things. not specific things. And there's nothing really holding me to perform these actions. That's an uncomfortable purpose, right? So there's nothing holding that guy to his word to say that he's going to do that stuff that he says he's going to do. Any purpose that seems uncomfortable is kind of reduces the likelihood that we'll add that coin. But if there's a coin that had a pre-mine because of an internal process that the pre-mine was basically required, right, in order to facilitate this process, and the process is automatic, then that was a purpose, right? There's a purpose for that. Or if somebody has a wallet and he puts the coins in the wallet and he says, okay, I'm using this for this, I'm using this for this, this is the bounty for this, this is the bounty for this, and he's actually paying out these bounties as they are occurring, then great. I mean, he's doing the right thing. So that's what I'm talking about when I'm talking about purpose.
One of the things that I was surprised about was, and I got it wrong a couple times, that you're actually based in America.
Yes.
You're in Florida. And I was like, oh, isn't he the one that's in like Siberia or Romania or this or that? And they're like, no, dude, he's in Florida.
Siberia's a little cold, so I don't want to go there.
America has such a harsh regulatory environment that I was frankly surprised that you were based in Florida. And, do you intend to move to another country that's more regulatorily free, or... Oh, sorry.
No.
No,
that's not the intention. I wrestled with this idea of offshore versus onshore when I was setting up the company. And, there's pluses and minuses on each. The problem is you can't run offshore to run away from regulation, because the regulation is always going to be there.
Right.
You can't hide from it. So you may as well just face it. And you shouldn't use regulation as your determination to where you want to reside. The determination for forming a U.S. corporation and being in the U.S. was I wanted to make people comfortable with dealing with me as a company, and to have a reputation, and to be kind of like the de facto place for a comfortable and safe environment for trading your cryptocurrency. And if that means I have to comply with regulation, then so be it.
Right.
I prefer not to file a bunch of paperwork, but if I have to, I will. I'll do whatever is required. Will we move offshore for certain things? We may, but that it won't be the purpose because of some regulation. It would be because it would make certain things easier to do.
Right. What do you think Bitcoin should be categorized as? Or do you buy into the argument that the government should make its own category for the cryptocurrency space? In light of the Bitcoin BitLicense hearing that's happening in New York this week, what do you think the discussion should be when it comes to how the heck do we categorize?
I just feel that whatever the discussion is, it just needs to be discussed, right? Because it's not really being discussed. I don't like the fact that we have these broad regulations that were written 20 years ago, 30 years ago, that we are trying to fit Bitcoin into. We need clarification. Whichever way it goes, I'm not too partial. I don't really care which way it goes. I just want it discussed and I want it defined.
The only thing that's worse than a bad outcome is an unknown, because you can't even plan for it.
I don't like unknowns. If we can define it, then we can comply with it. If it's unknown, then it's going to be unknown whether or not we're in compliance. Right? So I think it's great that they're pulling out Bitcoin as a topic of discussion as far as creating licenses just for the virtual currency medium, and hopefully good stuff comes out of that and other states follow.
Right.
And what I would really like is to have some kind of one federal license, one central entity to deal with, rather than 40 something different states, because it's kind of a pain.
So where does Cryptsy fit in to the landscape of altcoin exchanges? Like, where do you guys see yourself in that space, and what's your world domination plan?
I don't have a world domination plan.
That's what you're supposed to say.
There are things I would like to implement, and I would like to implement them well. One of the things that I've always wanted to do was bring U.S. dollars to the exchange, but of course that's difficult, especially being a U.S. company. But we'll get there. What that will allow is people who want to trade altcoins, it'll make it much easier for them to buy groceries with their altcoins. Because right now you have to go basically cash out your altcoin for a Bitcoin or Litecoin, take your Bitcoin to a different exchange to get US dollars or whatever currency you're looking for. So it's a process. If we could reduce that process for the folks that are looking to do that stuff, it's going to be a great benefit. There are a lot of things that we want to do, and I'm not going to broadcast it out on all of our future endeavors, but basically everything we do is going to be to enhance the community as a whole, especially for altcoins.
Great. Well, thank you so much.
You're welcome. Thanks for having me.
CryptoKit is the world's first Chrome browser Bitcoin wallet. It's the easiest, fastest Bitcoin wallet payment system. With a simple one-click install, it takes just seconds to get your wallet set up. And because CryptoKit finds the address and payment for you, there's no more fussing around or tab switching. CryptoKit is more than just a wallet. It comes with a preloaded PGP encrypted social network, news feeds from Reddit and Google, and up-to-date charts from exchanges. Finally, CryptoKit Directory allows you to make two-click payments with any of the BitPay merchants. Once you install CryptoKit, you won't need anything else. For more information or to download CryptoKit, visit CryptoKit.com.
Would you like to buy Bitcoin? Cash into Coins provides the fastest, easiest, and safest way to buy Bitcoin in the United States. Simply place an order online, deposit cash at any supported bank, and relax. Cash into Coins will verify your deposit and send out your Bitcoin within 24 hours. Join tens of thousands of people who have purchased from Cash into Coins. What are you waiting for? Buy your Bitcoin today. Go to cashintocoins.com. That's cashintocoins.com.
The China Syndrome. Written by Hayden Gill, read by Adam B. Levine. Part 1. Practicing quiet diplomacy and winning mainland acceptance of Bitcoin. The China question is a rhetorical issue of political, military, and economic force. Its amorphous nature changing from a matter of Cold War bellicosity to diplomatic engagement, converting yet again into White House summits and cultural exchanges, followed by massive investments and mutual bonds of financial interdependency, climaxed by strategic competition. It is this situation, nearly 3/4 of a century of revolution and upheaval, of 5-year plans and great leaps forward, of famine, rapid industrialization, and demands for personal liberty. It's this whirlwind of change, from communist power to capitalist excitement, that makes China's leaders pine for the sacredness of stability. To my fellow supporters of Bitcoin, these events are a primer about modern Chinese history and the necessity for quiet diplomacy. Thus, we should view the People's Bank of China restrictions about the use of Bitcoin as an opportunity to assuage the concerns of mainland financial institutions and members of the Communist Party of China. We, as users, merchants, and champions of this alternative currency, need to transition our actions and temper our language without diluting our message, so Bitcoin can flourish alongside the renminbi and yuan. We must practice the art of politics as education, enabling China's leaders to take credit for embracing Bitcoin while reassuring mainland officials that this currency will not replace the renminbi. For the quiet diplomacy I propose is an acknowledgement of reality, as well as an understanding of the symbolism of a nation's paper money. Imprinted on every renminbi, dollar, euro, peso, and yen, upon this collection of cotton and lint in hues of red, green, and yellow, which bear the images of premiers, presidents, and prime ministers, imprinted on fiat money is a statement of nationalism. That we, the People's Republic of China, are great actors on the economic stage. In other words, don't threaten the stability of the mainland or disrespect her projection across Asia and the Pacific Rim. Achieving this goal starts with the kind of quiet diplomacy we can practice through social media, where we modify our language from utopian prophecies to pragmatic communications. Indeed, the Bitcoin community needs to have its own version of the 3 joint communiques, a collective, albeit less official, series of statements from top investors, miners, and merchants, that this alternative currency is a welcome asset for the People's Bank of China, both as a means of profit and as a hedge against inflation. The promise of adding revenue and a treasury awash in more tax dollars, thanks to the acceptance and use of bitcoins, is a boon for the mainland and an attractive addition to China's sovereign wealth funds. Part 2. Preserving stability and easing acceptance of bitcoins. One country, two systems. The best examples of success of quiet diplomacy regarding Bitcoin is the one between Hong Kong and the mainland. Within the former, with its own political system, independent judiciary, and currency, there are also Bitcoin ATM machines, one of which processed $1 million in transactions last month. The placement of more of these machines, as well as the frequency by which residents and travelers in Hong Kong use these ATMs, confirms two important points. The first is about political and economic freedom, while the other is a matter of common sense. Given the level of concern about stability from mainland officials, there is a flip side to Bitcoins. There's no such thing as a little bit of freedom. It's not self-contained and it's not controllable, and whatever you release here will reverberate beyond the expansive skyline and harbors of Hong Kong. Neither the altitude of Victoria Peak nor the high rises of Kowloon Peninsula can enclose an idea, invisible in its presence and viral in its dissemination. Time and time alone will soften the mainland's resistance to the use of bitcoins. Events can, however, accelerate time, provided the inevitable is not a synonym for unavoidable chaos. Freedom and liberty have their own constraints by law and by custom, but they garner acceptance as an issue of common sense. Let us therefore do our duty and educate mainland merchants and bankers about the mutually beneficial relationship between bitcoins and the renminbi. With humility and resolution, let us practice the quiet diplomacy the mainland deserves, and her citizens expect to receive. We can mute our trumpets without silencing our triumphal spirits, because we can and should defer to the needs of the People's Bank of China, while educating her leaders and guiding her members towards a source of progress and wealth. Those actions also signify the evolution of the Bitcoin community, from outliers on the fringe to occupants of mainstream credibility. With the arrival of that milestone, we can rejoice in the Chinese proverb about beauty, creating harmony in the home, so there may be order in the nation, and from that order, there may be peace in the world. Let us cherish that adage.
Hi, my name is Malcolm Cassell. I was going to talk to you a little bit about what's happening in the China market. I think that there's a lot of interest. A lot of things have changed over the past 6 months. A couple months ago, I was speaking at the Vegas convention on Bitcoin. I'm an investor in one of the exchanges in China. It was a pretty exciting time because at that time, China was contributing the largest amount to the trade volume, and things have changed a lot. So I thought what I do, since I think it's an area of a lot of interest for folks, would be to talk kind of what's happening in the China market and maybe give you a little historical perspective and where things are going. So first of all, you guys probably know that at the beginning of the year, the China contribution to trade volume was 5%, at best. And there was this just intense run-up. And overnight, everyone was realizing, wait, Chinese traders are actually driving the price. And so their preferences, if they thought it was a good day, price went up a lot. If it went down, same thing. So a lot of the reason for that, we believe, was partially because, in the Chinese economy, there's a few places to actually put money. Real estate was a market that got very, very hot and got shut down in many ways because the ability to basically finance real estate was shut down. The ability to buy multiple properties for investment got shut down. And in a savings account in China, you make almost nothing. So basically the average consumer there says, hey, wow, Bitcoin is actually a place for me to speculate. So that's one contributing factor. The second factor is that actually it's a very technically savvy, there's a huge technically savvy audience there. So the idea of the complexity around Bitcoin is actually not a big deal. It's actually a very engineering-driven society. The third contributing factor is culturally, Chinese just love to gamble. So they would rather, and in fact, guys who day trade there, think of it as they think of it like a job, and they call it gambling, but they're like, yeah, that's my job. I gamble for a living, and it's really just like this thing that people do. So there's just a lot of reasons why Bitcoin became acceptable. But then the fourth factor, which I think really made it a perfect storm, was all of the exchanges decided, hey, we're not going to charge any fees. And as soon as there was no cost to get in and get out of a position, it just went nuts. And then you saw what happened. Tons of money started to pour into the market. Price shot up to 1,200, and well, there were other peaks as well. And that really got the attention of the regulators. So the regulators had been looking at this for quite a while and been trying to, I think, decide internally what to do. There was not a lot of information as to what they were thinking and what they were planning. As you know, a lot of other markets, Germany, Canada, the U.S., were all sort of making some statements, some hints as to where they were going and what they were going to do with it. And I think China was internally was trying to figure out what made sense, and externally also look and see how other folks were handling it. So a couple things happened in succession, and literally right after I was on stage in Vegas, some major things happened. One, the government said, well, okay, Bitcoin is not a currency. And by doing that, that was actually a good thing in many ways. But what they also said was you can't use it to set pricing. So that means that technically if you're selling something, you couldn't price it in Bitcoin. So the idea that you could actually sell, Tiger Direct and Overstock and so forth were setting prices, that basically took that option off the table for China, which for guys who have payment processors, I have a lot of investments, and one of them is in a payment processor. I was kind of hopeful we would be able to do business in China. That kind of left the room. It's a good question. Everybody says, why? What's the rationale? I mean, we asked that as well. And very, very rarely do you get explanation. And I'll tell you that whatever explanation you do get is probably not the one that's the real reason. There's a lot of misdirection, right, going on. This is politics, and it's big. I mean, you're dealing with big ministries and so forth. So we don't really know why. But I would say that one of the issues is currency control in China is very, very sensitive. And so the obvious rationale would be, oh, hey, we don't want something that would compete with the renminbi inside of Chinese borders. And there was a run-up for something called a QQB, which was another virtual currency. This was almost 10 years ago. And it had trading platforms, and it was issued by a private company, and it had a value, and people were treating it like money, and that got shut down sort of under the same guise of, hey, you can't price things in this, you can't trade it like money, and so forth. That isn't exactly what happened here, but there was a precedent for it, and so a lot of people believe that's really what it comes from. So nobody can say for sure, but that's kind of, I think, a lot of people's theory. The next thing that happened was they said, well, trading Bitcoin, or Bitcoin as a business in dealing with it, handling it, and so forth, insurance companies, banks, commodity firms, you can't touch that. Now that was actually good news, because they basically created swim lanes, and they said that all these other well-established, well-financed, large industries couldn't participate in the Bitcoin ecosystem. So all the guys in the Bitcoin ecosystem were doing cartwheels because they're like, woohoo, we have a free reign to go and roll out our businesses and develop. So that was good news. So that was kind of, we were like, okay, well, that's not too bad. And that announcement was right before the conference. And then right after the conference, basically the government came out and heavily dissuaded third-party payment processors from working with Bitcoin exchanges. Now, they didn't outright say, hey, it's illegal, which is another tactic to leave the door open to do things later. But, from our understanding, there was basically a quiet meeting with the payment processors. They got them all in the room, and they're like, you need to stop doing business with the exchanges. And the next day, all the payment processors basically said, no more. Now, that was bad news, because it meant that you were no longer able to use a payment processor. So think of it like a PayPal, the equivalent of basically being able to fund from your bank account and then transfer that money to an exchange. You were no longer able to do that. And so that really took a lot of wind out of the sail. The second thing they said was banks we're no longer going to be able to accept deposits and withdrawals for Bitcoin exchanges. Now that was horrible. And they said that by the end of January, all money had to be, taken out, and you had basically a period of time to get your money out if you had it sitting in an exchange and you wanted it deposited to your bank account. That sent a chill through the whole ecosystem. It's actually quite similar to what happened in the US around exchanges and banks basically dealing directly with exchanges. The reason why you can still use, say, Coinbase in the US is because they're not actually trading and have an order book the way a lot of other exchanges do. They have a sort of complicated way of essentially buying ahead, and then basically you're buying out of their inventory or they're selling out of their inventory, and vice versa. It's a subtle difference in the rules, but allows them to continue doing what they're doing. But banks in general have, in America, if you try to open an exchange, they're like, hey, yeah, we don't want to touch Bitcoin. I mean, you can go bank after bank after bank, and they'll pretty much tell you that. So that's kind of actually, it's sort of that way now in China. There is an exchange, however, that is, basically breaking the rules, and you deposit to a corporate account. That's the one on the list here, which you can see in the past 30 days, because they're the only ones doing this. They're doing like almost all the volume in China in renminbi. And that's pretty much why. There's a lot of speculation that their volume number isn't real, but we can talk about that all day long. There's a long precedent for folks in China not really reporting accurate numbers to appear bigger, but we do know their volume is significantly larger than other groups, mainly because they're still accepting bank deposits, and it's in a very, very gray area. The company has incredible liability because it's essentially not allowed. So that's the current ecosystem. Basically, you're not allowed to use a third-party payment provider, like a PayPal, to fund your account. You're not allowed to essentially deposit into a bank account. Technically, how are you going to trade Bitcoin? That's a big question. Nobody really knows. They have not outlawed Bitcoin in China. They have not said it's illegal. Of course, you can do person-to-person transactions, like the local coins model. There's no restriction around that we've seen. But I would say that it's a pretty uncertain time around how the ecosystem is going to unfold. So let me talk a little bit about other things that happened in history that would give us an idea of how things might unfold. Typically in China, when something is unregulated, there will be several players who will operate in this sort of gray zone. And then what happens is once regulation is determined, top handful of players, 1, 2, 3 players, will get licenses, and either they'll auction off additional ones or they'll just say that's it. Most of the exchanges believe that as long as they maintain operations and try to follow the rules as much as they can, eventually when licensing comes out, they'll be able to operate with a certain amount of legitimacy. This happened with virtual goods. Virtual goods was very interesting because similar to the QQB example I gave you, virtual goods had value to people, right? So it was sort of awesomeness from some MMORPG. People were trading it and actually making money off of it. That became very, very big very quickly in China. And so then there was a question of, well, how is this going to be regulated? And in Korea, they set a very interesting precedent, which is what ended up happening in China as well. The regulator said, if you are a game company, you cannot run your own exchange for these goods. And that was really, really good for the consumers because it meant you couldn't self-deal. In other words, if you were the creator of a virtual good, the fact that you couldn't run an exchange meant that you couldn't manipulate price, you couldn't manipulate supply and demand, and so forth. So it was good to have it as a third-party thing. What was bad, however, was that the government was increasingly concerned about the impact of these games on society and how people were getting addicted to it and so forth. So over time there were regulations that tried to basically control ages of people who could participate and so forth. But eventually what happened was licenses were issued, and the guys who were early ended up getting those licenses and have billion-dollar businesses today. What a lot of us believe is that eventually the government will issue some kind of licensing, and the guys who are players, as long as they play nice and maintain relationships with the regulators, will ultimately get access to that legitimacy and then be able to do business. In the meantime, there's still a lot of trading happening in China. You can see, if you look at the past 30 days, even if you don't believe this number of Huobi, let's say it was half that, China still represents a pretty significant contribution to the global trade volume. I think it will for the foreseeable future. I think that once regulation comes out, we're going to see a much bigger proliferation of ways it can be used. The mining community in China is pretty massive. Mining has not been regulated in any way, shape, or form there. There is some fear that could get regulated. If mining were suddenly made, illegal, that would definitely be a very challenging place for the Bitcoin community. But I don't think that's going to happen. I'd say the likelihood's pretty low, as far as I can tell. But that is part of the ecosystem. The mining community there is very strong, and there's a lot of believers in Bitcoin, similar to folks here. So what's happening in the future? Post-regulation, I think the market there will be very exciting. There's definitely a lot of enthusiasm and a lot of participants still in the trading side. One of the things that does change things with the regulators is the charging of fees. So the top exchange here is not charging fees, and so they're still basically allowing people to get in and out of positions, so it drives a tremendous amount of volume. The regulators do want fees charged because they want a little bit more control over the growth of the market. I mean, basically before regulation, last month, the market was just growing vertically. It was just insane. And afterwards, it's sort of now growing at, I guess, maybe a less aggressive curve, but still growing. So I think that ultimately fees in the market are good because it'll sort of keep things a little bit more orderly. So that gives you kind of an overview of the exchange market there. As I said, third-party payments is not happening. Mining is still pretty thriving. There's a lot of other ecosystem plays that I think people are waiting on the sidelines to see because the exchange side kind of drives things. I'll give you an example. If you look at what happens with ATMs can't really work well unless you have access to exchanges, and exchanges are orderly. So until exchanges kind of get worked out, the ATM business would be kind of on hold. And there's just a ton of other businesses that work that way. The one input that is working right now is the voucher system, and that's basically where you would say buy a card for cash, and then you redeem that card for Bitcoin on an exchange. So that is the one input mechanism that does seem to be working and is considered legal right now.
Adam B. Levine here. This question wasn't picked up well by the recording, but basically the questioner asks for more information about the Chinese exchange that still does accept yuan deposits against the guidance.
Basically a legal deposit of funds, or if they start to charge fees, I think that there'll be a dramatic reduction in volume in China. I think, it'll probably negatively affect price. I think there's other forces going on that will probably compensate for that. Maybe not immediately, but I'd say in the near term. So, I personally, as an investor, I'm not worried about it because we've watched short-term declines that pretty quickly recover. But I think there's a likelihood that we could see a big reduction in volume, which would affect price.
How did the zero-fee exchanges make money?
Well, okay, so the fundamental business model in China is called war of attrition, especially around net businesses. So by charging no fees, the idea is to drive lots of volume, market share, and try and make it back later. So basically the business model is burn your investment capital for as long as you can, and then see who stays in business the longest. That's the model there.
I guess a follow-up. If it was attributed to Lee in charge of BTC China, I believe he said that he wanted to start charging fees. If it wasn't him who said it, it was published that they wanted to charge fees with the feeling that they would be in a better position to get a license down the road. Does that argument seem valid to you with your experience?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. It's pretty clear that a no-fee environment drives just incredible speculation, and the government agencies don't like that. They like to see it more controlled. So
it's true that they now charge a fee and Huobi right now is not?
Yes, Huobi does not charge fees. I think there is still a withdrawal fee, but that's it. That's about it. So on the actual, once your money's in, getting in and out of positions costs nothing. And that's basically where the volume comes from.
Changing the subject a tiny bit, but I was just Bitcoin's number 1, 2 might be Litecoin, but what do you think 3 and 4 is?
If you want to know by market cap, just go on CoinMarketCap. You can see yourself.
Just your opinion. What do you think has legs?
Legs. Yeah. It's a good question. I'm probably the worst person to ask about altcoins because I'm pretty negative about them because I think that they're diluting the Bitcoin environment. And I think for cryptocurrencies to exist, I think that I think altcoins probably need to go. I mean, and not that I have anything against altcoins. It's just that I think that, Bitcoin is still in what I would say infancy, right? And so the issue is Bitcoin needs to be easier to use. There's some technical issues have to be addressed. There got to be tons of on-ramps, tons of off-ramps. And I think, maybe there's room for one altcoin, but I think 50 is just ridiculous, and it dilutes the energy of the development community as well as everyone else who's trying to make Bitcoin, I guess, mainstream. I mean, I think investors are certainly outsiders look at it and they see all the altcoins and they are completely freaked out because they're like, what is all of this? And that's one of the things that I think hurts the industry. So I think that for Bitcoin to survive, there has to be consolidation around cryptocurrencies. I think things have to live on the blockchain. If you're looking at sort of the new, shall we say, protocols, I think the protocols should be supportive of the existing blockchain because I think it's got to be, everyone has to support one thing for the whole ecosystem to work. That's just my opinion. I mean, I've lived through when there was, 1,000 Bluetooth varieties and 1,000 Wi-Fi varieties and 1,000 port protocols. And it works because we have one Bluetooth, we got one Wi-Fi, and we got, one USB, whatever it is, right? So, I mean, there's some exceptions, but basically consolidation at this stage is going to be, I think, good for it. And that's just my opinion.
I have a follow-on question to that. I agree with you. The altcoins are somewhat diluting the message of Bitcoin, but now they're talking about BitShares. What would happen if a significant number of the stock trading on the NASDAQ and the New York Stock Exchange moved into BitShares and started trading on the exchanges and started being used for currency? What would that effect be?
If you had direct access to, say, Bitcoin through exchanges, I think we would see dramatic appreciation.
But what I mean is the stocks that are trading there, instead of trading on the exchange, if they moved into altcoins and started trading on Crypto.com as a BitShare instead of New York Stock Exchange share. I own a corporation and we're in the process of talking with Invictus and going public cryptographically and having an altcoin that represents shares in our company.
If an altcoin represents a specific company, I don't think that's dilutive to the Bitcoin ecosystem, because you're backing a particular enterprise. But I think a coin, for the sake of being a coin, is dilutive. Because I think protocols built on altcoins will dilute the whole ecosystem, and I think people won't get it. But if you say, oh, that just represents a company, people, I think, get, oh, okay, that's a company. But Bitcoin, I think, should be the only crypto coin, or at least the only blockchain for a crypto coin. Thank you.
This is Chris Joseph bringing you news on Next, the first true second-generation cryptocurrency for February 7th, 2014. I've got two things to tell you about today. First, a development team has been formed and has provided funding for an effort to create NextCash, which will implement the zero-coin algorithm as a layer on top of Next. If successful, it will enable fully anonymous transactions secured by Next's lightweight proof-of-stake blockchain. Second, nextvote.com has been created to help the Next community make decisions. It's a simple application that uses Next's secure transactions to ensure that each Next account can only submit one response to a poll. This will tide the community over until Next's built-in protocol-based voting system feature is finished. For more information, head to nextcrypto.org or mynxt.org. And stay tuned for more news on Next and the next Let's Talk Bitcoin broadcast.
This morning, we're joined on Let's Talk Bitcoin by Scott Robinson, one of the leads at the Plug and Play Tech Center, Bitcoin Accelerator, and the Silicon Valley Bitcoin Meetup Group. Scott, thanks for stopping by. How are things?
Things are going very well. Thanks for having me again, Adam.
Yeah, absolutely. So the last time we spoke, you had just announced the Bitcoin Accelerator program. Can you kind of bring us up to speed on how that's going?
So at this point, we've been able to pull together, I'd say, about 25 different mentors, each of which will be giving 2 hours per month over the course of the 3-month Accelerator program. So the first 5 startups that come through We'll have a pretty intimate and very close-knit relationship with each of these people. And of course, some of these include the likes of Perkins Coie, Lightspeed Ventures, Charles River, Roger Ver, Andreas Antonopoulos, and a number of the other thought leaders in the space. So at this point, we've had a little over 45 applicants, and we're going to have to drill down to 5 over the course of the next 2 weeks. So very exciting. We're having a lot of inquiries as to partners for investment. It's definitely a hot space just from the more traditional investment perspective. So yeah, just lots of work, but it's very exciting, and I'm very energized for this first batch.
So let's talk about what kind of the experience is for these, because it seems like incubator programs and accelerator programs really do kind of vary from place to place. So it sounds like you're bringing in lots of kind of outside expertise from the actual Bitcoin space and from the investment space. What is the purpose of the mentor program? And you said 2 hours per month between a bunch of different startups. How is something like that going to work?
The first week of each of these months will be somewhat like a boot camp, or more or less like finals, if you will. Really, we're trying to attract the type of people that are earlier in their product or their startup, but they're the type that are going to have to say goodbye to the girlfriend or wife and say, I've got another 14-hour day today, similar to what I'm having to do recently. But with this kind of one-on-one / 1-on-30 group mentor session, basically there'll be a specific vertical or expertise that'll be spoken to by one of these mentors, each of which will then have somewhat of a discussion afterwards, so a group environment for them to interact and interface with some of these people that have had well over 20 years experience in their respective vertical or market. So I basically tried to one-off every tangible need that a startup in Bitcoin might have, and I tried to take it both a traditional startup paradigm as well as a virtual currency paradigm. So with that being said, we have a number of people that have sold companies, exited with 700 million plus. I think some of the people in the group, if you were to collectively put that together, they've easily been able to exit with over $2 billion worth of income. So they're very, very tried and true when it comes to their expertise. And I think in the long term, this sort of value of being able to impart their expertise and experiences is unparalleled. So between Bill Tai from Charles River and, of course, people like Michael Yang or Vences Cesares and Ben Davenport, I think those individuals are going to prove to be very valuable to the startups just purely from what they've gone through in their own different projects and ventures in the past.
This is going to be a real quick hit interview for Let's Talk Bitcoin, but I do have one final question. For startups that are kind of trying to figure out how best to proceed with their plan, what are the costs of associating with something like your program? Is there any downside, or do they give up anything?
We try and offer $25K for 5% of their company. With that $25K, it comes with office space, obviously the mentorship sessions, and then every other offering that Plug and Play has. So many corporate relationships, which in turn bring deal flow. We have service partners from all over the valley, so anything from HR, payroll, etc. You also get the community. At the same time, you'll be able to interface with the Silicon Valley Bitcoin meetup every Tuesday, and that community in and of itself, I'd say, is very helpful. Just primarily because it's got many developers, engineers, people in business and finance. If you're looking to fundraise and you need some help getting your startup off the ground and you've been bootstrapping it for a while, you've got a great idea, maybe you're in stealth, I'd highly encourage you to come to our AngelList website, angelco/plug-and-play-bitcoin, and check out who we've got on board for mentors, and then maybe hit the apply button and we'll go from there.
Scott Robinson, Plug and Play Tech Center, Bitcoin Accelerator. Thanks for your time.
Thanks, Adam.
Thanks for listening to episode 82 of Let's Talk Bitcoin. Cryptsy was captured by John Mohan, edited by Matthew Zipkin. The China Syndrome was written by Hayden Gill, read and produced by Adam B. Levine. China with Malcolm Cassell was captured by Steve Malagodi of Spectacular Sound and edited by Adam B. Levine. Plug and Play was captured and edited by Adam B. Levine. Music for this episode was provided by General Fuzz and Jared Rubens. Have any questions? Email Adam at letstalkbitcoin.com. Have a good one.